You are not what happens to you. You are what you choose to become. Carl Jung. You didn't change for her. You abandoned yourself. Piece by piece, without even knowing it, you trimmed off parts of your soul to fit into her image. You traded your wildness for comfort, your mystery for approval. You looked into her eyes and lost sight of the man hiding behind yours. You've never read Jung, but your shadow has memorized every line. Jung understood that to be seen can be dangerous, not because the other intends harm, but because their gaze tempts us to become an ideal, not a self. That's not love. That's unconscious fusion. It's when a man stops individuating, stops becoming, and starts performing. Not as himself, but as her fantasy. You think it's devotion, but it's self-betrayal. Whether you're 20, chasing after text bubbles, or 50, aching in the silence of a lifeless marriage, the pattern is the same. You didn't love her. You tried to merge with her. You disappeared into her because you were terrified of facing the chaos within. But hear this. The man who lives through her gaze dies by her withdrawal. This isn't bitterness. This is psychological fact. You see, Jung believed the unconscious is not just darkness, it's potential. But the man who expects a woman to define him, to complete him, has turned away from the very work that would make him whole. He's handed over his soul's compass, and she senses it. Whether she's 19 and led by instinct, or 45 and emotionally wise, she knows when you've placed her on the altar of your identity. She knows when your hunger for her becomes louder than your loyalty to your own self. And that's when she pulls away. Not because she is heartless, but because love cannot bloom where the masculine has gone limp. It needs tension. It needs edge. It needs your unshakable center. But the younger man doesn't know that yet. He still thinks love is an offering, something he can give to be chosen. He hasn't yet tasted the humiliation of being completely open, only to see her eyes search the room for someone more solid. But the older man, he knows. He knows what it's like to sit beside a woman who once burned for him, before he dimmed his fire to make her comfortable, before he stopped being a mirror of her unconscious and tried to become her shelter, before he killed his edge to keep the peace. She never wanted peace. She wanted presence. She wanted the man who remained untamed, sovereign. This is the Jungian truth. The feminine longs not for the man who becomes her, but for the man who remains himself in her presence. The man whose very being makes her confront her own unconscious depths. You've seen him. The man who doesn't flinch when she rages. The man who doesn't flood her with words when she withdraws. He holds. He waits. He doesn't beg, because he's not performing. And somehow, she cannot forget him. Not because he played a trick, but because he refused to sacrifice the integrity of his soul. This isn't manipulation. This is individuation. The lifelong task of becoming who you truly are. The rare man chooses his path first, his truth first, his wholeness first, and lets love follow if it's worthy. And if it isn't, he is still complete. That is the man she dreams of. Not the man who needs her, but the one who needs only to remain himself. This isn't a tactic. It's not a dating strategy. It's inner wholeness. The man who anchors in himself before reaching for love becomes immune to abandonment. He's not waiting to be chosen. He is. And if love arrives, it revolves around his center, never becomes it. That's the man women remember. Not because he chased them, but because he didn't dissolve for them. You were told to open up, to share, to spill everything in the name of vulnerability. And you did. But the more you gave, the more she pulled away. You confused exposure with intimacy. You thought laying your soul bare would earn trust, but all it did was make you legible, predictable, a creature without shadow. Why did it happen? Because you abandoned the mystery of your unconscious. Jung knew, man is not a finished thing. He is an unfolding. You turned your becoming into a performance. You reduced your complexity to a script of needs and hopes. You became a confession instead of a presence. And when you gave her your entire map, she lost interest in the terrain. You let her explore you before she earned it. She recoiled not because she's cruel, but because the masculine, when it is pure, is not a boy hoping to be healed. It is a silent force that exists whether witnessed or not. Jung called it the self, the union of all you are, seen and unseen. It moves from the unconscious to the conscious, not through begging, but through being. And this force says, I will not be shaped by your fear. I will not fracture to fit your fantasy. I exist. That's why the older man in the bar, with his tired eyes and slow breath, holds her gaze. Not because he tries, but because he has nothing left to prove. He's walked through fire. He's bent so far for love that he snapped. And now, what remains is unshakable. He's done chasing. He's done explaining. His silence isn't empty. It's earned. It's not performative. It's protective. It guards what the world tried to take, his authentic self. He no longer trades his energy for attention. And that stillness? It's magnetic. Younger men think volume equals power. But older men who've met their shadow? No. True gravity is quiet. She feels it. She doesn't know why. But she trembles in the presence of a man who has no urge to perform, no compulsion to win. Because that man has nothing to lose that isn't him. She feels something ancient stir. Not safety, but tension. Not comfort, but confrontation. The tension of standing before a man she cannot mold. The confrontation with her own projections. She meets a man who is whole, and it unsettles her. Because she cannot find an angle to control him, and she will test that. She'll push. She'll withdraw. She'll create chaos and call it passion to see if he wavers, if he bends, if he explains, if he chases. He collapses into shadow, into reflection. But if he holds, not for pride, but from depth, she feels something rare. It's not manipulation. It's not detachment. It's pure self-possession. And in that, she remembers what desire really is. Not need, but awe. The awe of meeting a man who will not bow for approval, who does not move to gain love, who stands, regardless. So when you feel the urge to fix it, to explain yourself, to prove your worth, remember this. She doesn't want a man who cannot breathe without her. She wants a man whose breath deepens when she's gone. That's the man whose gravity pulls her back, not with force, but with wholeness. Because she can't forget him, not because he was perfect, but because he was complete. There's a moment, quiet, invisible, when a man begins to vanish. No fireworks, no sirens, just a subtle fracture. He nods when his soul says no. He swallows truth to avoid tension. He hides a boundary behind a smile, and in doing so, he steps out of his own center, not for peace, but to be pleasing. Jung named this betrayal, a man falling into his shadow. It's when you deny your inner truth to survive the outer world. You convince yourself it's love. You think sacrifice is strength. But if you were honest, you'd know. It's not strength. It's fear dressed as loyalty. It's not a gift. It's quiet self-extinction. And here's the brutal truth. She knows. Even if she can't explain it, she feels it. The second your soul starts orbiting hers, she senses the imbalance. You begin to shape yourself around her moods, her silence, her approval. You become clay, formless, pliable. And she doesn't mourn you. She mourns the man you were before you disappeared, the one who once made her feel alive, uncertain, awake. You used to be mystery. Now you're maintenance. You've become her emotional insurance, predictable, comfortable, forgotten. And still, you wonder what went wrong. You say, "But I did everything right." Exactly. You became her idea of right. And in the process, you became wrong in the only way that matters. You lost yourself. You gave her the version of you that was safest, not realist. But she didn't fall in love with safe. She fell for the fire you had before you tried to put it out. And the older man, if he's finally honest, admits the most painful truth of all. He no longer knows who he is when she's not watching. He spent decades being the provider, protector, partner. But he forgot how to be the boy who danced with life. The boy who didn't need permission to dream, to speak, to walk away. That boy, wild and unformed, was closer to wholeness than the man shaped by duty and fear. But don't despair. This is the turning point. Because Jung taught us, the path of wholeness begins where the mask cracks, and manhood doesn't diminish with age. It deepens, if you dare to stop lying to yourself. And the lie is this, that her love is the prize. It never was. The true prize is becoming a man who remains whole in the presence of love, who doesn't shatter into roles, into fragments, into shadows, who can offer love freely, but never trades identity for intimacy. The real deception? That her love is the treasure. But Jung would say, the treasure is the self. The man who does not fracture when love enters the room. The man who does not shapeshift to earn affection. Who doesn't become less so she can feel more. He doesn't surrender his essence for connection. He lets her orbit without becoming her satellite. Yes, this defies what you've been taught. You were trained to please, to pursue, to prove your worth. But Jung exposed this conditioning for what it is, a denial of your deeper nature. You were not made to be her savior. You were made to be whole, alone first, always. And if she leaves, let her. If you're truly a man walking the path of individuation, then her absence isn't abandonment. It's realignment. You return to your axis. And maybe she comes back, maybe not. But either way, you stand. Not as a version of what she wants, but as the man you've remembered yourself to be. That's the paradox. When you stop needing to be chosen, you become unforgettable. But few men get there, because few endure the silence. They run from it, cave to it, collapse in it. They crawl back for warmth, apologizing for their truth, offering pieces of their soul in exchange for approval. But the man who doesn't flinch, the one who remains calm when she rages, still when she withholds, unmoved when she tests, not out of stubbornness, but because he refuses to lie to himself again. That man becomes unshakable. He becomes real. Jung called it individuation, the emergence of the true self from the masks and wounds of life. The man who carries the weight of his freedom without apology. The man who no longer performs. He doesn't seduce. He simply is. And that presence, raw, centered, unapologetic, shifts everything. She feels it. She may not like it. It confronts her with her own reflection. Because this man cannot be absorbed. He will not dissolve into her emotion. He will not surrender his direction to her insecurity. And that is when desire returns. Not for his validation, but for his mystery. Not because he pursued her, but because she now remembers what it feels like to be in the presence of a man who does not orbit her. There's no age limit to this. You could be 70 and still reclaim the self you abandoned, or 20, choosing now to never give it up again. And it begins not with loud declarations, but quiet refusals. Refusing to beg, refusing to bend for peace, refusing to betray your soul just to be seen. This is not cruelty. It is spiritual integrity. It starts small, not with bold moves, but with sacred refusals. You stop sending the last text begging for clarity. You stop breaking your silence just because it's uncomfortable. You stop pretending something doesn't hurt just to keep her from leaving. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be whole. And wholeness costs more than approval. Jung called it the journey of becoming, not a destination, but a process. You're not a role. You're not a puppet for her projections. You are a self in evolution. And even in stillness, you radiate force. Not because you're shouting, but because you've stopped apologizing for your existence. This is the legacy of the individuated man, the man who will not sell fragments of his soul to be chosen. Because every time you trade truth for comfort, you lose more than the moment. You lose alignment. You lose fire. And fire, once gone, is hard to reignite. No one warns you about this. No one tells you that if she truly respects you, she will not run when you reclaim your wholeness. She will meet you there, not as reward, but as a sovereign being herself, choosing you not out of need, but because she sees you don't need her. And if she can't, then she was never yours. She was a mirror, a reflection of where you had abandoned yourself. So shatter it, not out of rage, but out of reverence. Step forward, not into loneliness, but into power, because only in that solitude, the deep silence you once feared, will you encounter the man you were always meant to become. And that man, he is the one she cannot leave. You were told she would complete you, that her love would fill what's missing. But Jung would remind you, to be complete is to stop becoming. And the moment you hand someone that role, you surrender your path. You give her the pen and say, "Rewrite me." You abandon authorship. And a man without authorship is a man without self. You can see it in older men, their eyes, faded but haunted. They speak in softened tones, half-stories, safe memories. But the silence behind their words tells you what they lost. They surrendered the fire, traded depth for comfort, and now they walk through chapters that no longer belong to them. You see it in younger men too, the ones who mimic her values, mirror her moods, say the right things. But underneath it all, a leash, invisible but tight, not on the body, but around the will, and she feels it. She may not say it, but she senses it, the absence of sovereignty, and it dries her desire like cold wind over flame. Because desire doesn't crave obedience, it craves presence. The rare man, the Jungian man, writes his own myth, even if no one reads it, even if she never stays to see the ending, even if it leads to solitude, especially if it leads to solitude. Because in that chosen solitude, not loneliness, but sacred space, the self is forged, not by praise, but by fire, not by love, but by loss. It's where your false selves burn, and silence becomes your own kind of music. And when that man speaks, he does not impress. When he gives, it's not to bind. When he stays, it's not to prove. And when he leaves, he does not look back, because he belongs to himself. And that she feels, long before she understands it. Not every woman will understand this man. Most are used to men who fold, who contort themselves for affection. They've grown accustomed to emotional acrobatics, to the subtle art of strategic self-erasure. So when they meet a man who refuses to shrink, a man who lives from the core and not the crowd, they don't know what to do with him. But some women, the right women, won't recognize him with logic, but with their nervous system. They will feel it, the calm tension of a man who won't vanish into their fantasies. And it won't feel safe in the usual way. It will feel unsettling, awakening, real. You were taught to chase, to earn your place beside her. But the more you chase, the more you disappear. Let her come to you, not as a trophy, but as a test. Can you remain whole even in the presence of love? Can you stand your ground when she cries, seduces, storms? Can you stay loyal to your essence, not out of coldness, but because you finally vowed to never abandon yourself again? If you can, you will find a freedom. No woman, no praise, no fantasy can match. You will find yourself. And in that self, you'll discover something more than power. You'll discover peace. You're not the same man who began this journey. Something has shifted. Maybe it's subtle. Maybe it roars. But you feel it. That deep silence within you no longer feels like isolation. It feels like home. You're no longer reaching, no longer stretching yourself thin to be noticed. You've stopped performing love like it's an audition. 1916. Now you watch, quiet, aware, as the world orbits around a self you no longer compromise. And this, Jung knew, is the secret hidden deep in every man's unconscious. That you are not who they told you to be. You are not who she wanted you to become. You are nothing until you choose. And from that sacred nothing, you create everything. No borrowed script, no external savior, just authorship. Yours. Most men run from this. They escape into women, into work, into distraction. Anything to avoid the unbearable responsibility of self-definition. But you didn't. You stayed. You chose to carry the burden of your freedom, to create meaning, not inherit it, to love not from lack, but from fullness, to give from your center, never from your emptiness. And now, she feels it. Whether she's 25 or 62, radiant or wounded, she senses something ancient rise in your presence. Not a demand, not a plea, but a gravitational force that doesn't shift for approval and never bends for belonging. She may stay, she may go, but that's no longer the story, because you've stopped building your story around who stays. You are the story. She can read it or walk away, but you won't rewrite yourself for her approval ever again. This is your return, not to dominance, but to stillness. The holy stillness of a man who remembers who he is. He's not a mirror, not a mask, not a strategy, not a softened, acceptable version of himself. He simply is. And now the world must decide what to do with that. Because you will not beg, you will not kneel, you will not trade your soul for her warmth, her texts, or temporary highs. You walk forward now without needing a witness. And that is the man she will remember. The man her dreams cannot bury, even when her bed is warm, but her spirit feels cold. Because now you know. Nothing went wrong. You just hadn't arrived in yourself yet. But now you have. And from here, everything begins.